When they whipped me in the marketplace, everybody was there. I was really ashamed. That moment, I would have preferred to die than to suffer this humiliation.
She must be pious, young, well-educated, from another decent family, but above all patient. She will have to get used to living in my exceptional circumstances. These were the words spoken by Osama bin Laden to a Yemeni al-Qaeda cleric in 1999, when he was looking for a suitor to become his fifth wife. However, one key requirement was missing from that list: a willingness to live as a prisoner. The view of these jihadist groups, and particularly of a figure like the former leader of the cell responsible for the attack on the twin places women in a position of inferiority. According to their perspective, they are weak people who cannot occupy the same positions as men. In addition, they are constantly reduced to being sexual objects, victims of the cruelest and most humiliating treatment. As if that were not enough, if they do not respect this male supremacy, they will have to face the consequences. For this reason, in this new video from Military Force, we will review the brutality with which Muslim women are treated, and the terrible end to which those who manage to become part of extremist organizations are exposed. On May 2, 2011, U.S. Special Forces raided a house in the Pakistani city of Abbottabad. It was the end of a long search. The Americans' main target was inside: Osama bin Laden. The operation was fast and precise, led by Navy SEALs. After years of pursuing the leader of al-Qaeda, the soldiers managed to get him face to face before shooting him. The most wanted man in the world died instantly, even though a woman at his side had tried to protect him by opening fire on the Americans. She was Amal al-Sada, one of the 3 wives who were with him that day. Bin Laden married 5 times throughout his life. His first marriage took place in 1974, when the future leader of al-Qaeda was just 17 years old, to his Syrian cousin Najwa Ghanem. The couple had 11 children and separated in 2001 when Osama went into hiding following the terrorist attack on the Twin Towers. However, by then she was no longer the jihadist's only wife. In 1983, he married for the second time, this time to Khadija Sharif, a religious scholar 9 years his senior. She was subsequently the only woman to be granted a divorce, as she could not stand her husband's lifestyle. In 1985, Khairia Sabar became bin Laden's 3rd wife, and in 1987, Siham Sabar was his 4th. This was possible thanks to Islamic law, which allows a man to have 4 wives at the same time. Following this same commandment, as the extremist leader had divorced one of them, in 2000 he was able to complete his 5th marriage with the Yemeni Amal al-Sada, his protector until the last moment. That act illustrates the devotion that the latter had for her husband, although it does not necessarily speak of a loving relationship or respect. In fact, it can be said that Osama bin Laden's wives lived as prisoners during the time they were by his side. Just as the law allowed him to carry out several marriages at the same time, the world to which the leader of al-Qaeda belonged was created under an ideology where gender roles never evolved. And to tell the truth, bin Laden's wish was for things to remain that way, to such an extent that today, men feel the right to punish women for the sole fact of not respecting the clothing they are ordered to wear.
Tell us about the level of punishments.
If the woman tries to escape when we arrest her, then she'll get 60 lashes. Otherwise, when it comes to clothes, if she's not wearing the abaya or she's wearing high heels, then it's the standard 40 lashes. What upset me most was lashing old women when they weren't wearing the proper clothes. These women were like my mother. I mean, for girls, yes, they should wear the proper attire. But old women, no. They'd lash them and humiliate them.
Many of the jihadist organization's leading figures have been intellectuals, doctors, lawyers, and engineers who are perfectly comfortable with certain aspects of modernity, but differ from the West on how women should be allowed to participate in daily life. In their culture, they are considered chattel in some cases, venerated mothers in others, and almost always treated as icons that must be protected from outside influences. However, this view is repeated not only within al-Qaeda, but in all Islamist organizations. In its 1988 pact, the Palestinian group Hamas set out its vision of Muslim women as creators of men and educators of future generations. It is they who prepare future fighters, but they do not have the right to participate in society from any other place. In this way, they end up being repressed and even violently punished if they do not fulfill their mandate. This idea was strictly practiced throughout the entire 1990s. However, the beginning of the new century was accompanied by some changes. There is no doubt that 2001 was a turning point in the fight against the West, starting with the attack on the Twin Towers that unleashed the so-called War on Terror. This initiative, led by the United States, focused on al-Qaeda and other associated groups. On October 7th of that year, an invasion of Afghanistan was launched to go after jihadist militants. Several months after the arrival of American forces, an elderly man named Sufi Abdulaziz Baba was assigned the task of caring for the widows of 22 al-Qaeda fighters who had been killed. As casualties among the insurgents increased, the number of women in the group continued to grow. Fleeing from the Americans, they hid in a compound in Paktika province. However, their numbers grew to the point where it became impossible to protect all of them. The only alternative was to give rifles to some of them so they could defend themselves. Suddenly, not only did they have weapons in their possession, but they also began training out of sight of the men. That was the first step for women to approach weapons, but Islamist organizations still disagreed with that role. In the following years, extremist Muslim women began to challenge al-Qaeda's refusal to include them in their ranks. Ayman al-Zawahiri, Osama Bin Laden's right-hand man and the organization's second-in-command, said that women's role should be limited to caring for homes and children of fighters. This enraged a group that raised their voice, advocating for their right to participate in the war. The pressure exerted and the relentless desire to participate in armed actions aimed at the expansion of Islam finally were heard. Although that did not mean that the fate of women did not have a brutal outcome. Firstly, we can ask what changed, and the answer is simple. The organization needed more recruits, and on its path to expansion, it could not afford to continue losing important men, while a large group of women was willing to give their lives for the cause. This led to the second point, which had to do with the opportunity that opened up for women. Their commitment to the jihadist movement led them to become responsible for many suicide bombings. Part of the thinking behind this was practical. It was believed that they aroused less suspicion than men, as they passed through less rigorous security checks. Belgian Muriel de Gauque carried out the first known attack in which a woman blew herself up. It was in Iraq in 2005, and it served to convince the then leader of al-Qaeda in that country, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, who still had doubts about carrying out such actions with female members. During the following 5 years, around 500 attacks were carried out by women on Iraqi soil.
A new and disturbing form of terror is emerging. The perpetrators are women, willing to die for their cause. Female jihadis have been responsible for close to 70% of all suicide attacks in Asia in the last 3 years. Over 10 have blown themselves up for their beliefs. Other women have carried out attacks with guns and knives.
This action was replicated by other extremist groups during the last decade, and beyond the fact that al-Qaeda continues to be the most resistant to female participation within its ranks, cases are still growing. An example of this is Nada Ma'id al-Qahtani, a Saudi woman also known as Julaybib, in reference to a martyr and companion of the Prophet Muhammad. Through social media, she announced that she would travel to Syria to fight on the front lines alongside her brother, participating in jihadist operations. In addition to receiving support from hundreds of Islamist activists, she highlighted the demand for gender equality from those women who continue to fight to occupy the same place as men in this war. The modern era has contributed to this in several aspects. An example is that there is no longer a distinction of sex for members of extremist groups seeking to recruit followers to their cause. They use the internet to reach millions of people in every corner of the world, and it's work in which women have actively participated. This is a sign that the horizon could be more promising for them within al-Qaeda and similar organizations. Nevertheless, as we approach the end of this video, we can assert that regardless of what the future may hold, Muslim women have been victims throughout their lives. They were and continue to be slaves to a doctrine that keeps them imprisoned, yearning for the freedom they see around them but cannot attain. As if that weren't enough, they suffer constant humiliation and are often the targets of physical and psychological violence. However, they remain steadfast, fighting for their principles and ideologies. Now, it's time to bid farewell. Thank you very much for staying until the end. We look forward to having you join us in the next military force video.